we have a great challenge. This is a health crisis that is now hitting the majority of the world's population, and particularly in the developing world, there is often very little health system infrastructure, very little resources. So whether you look across Africa, parts of Asia and Latin America, the wave is still arriving. And the greatest concern, and therefore the Secretary General's call also was not only for the G20 to coordinate amongst themselves, but also to take, as 80% of the world's economy, a significant step towards helping the developing world. This is a critical priority, and that is what the World Health Organization, the humanitarian organizations within the UN, and also in the non-governmental world, and now the whole development system of the UN are focused on. We are trying to use the time that perhaps is still left in some countries to particularly focus on the protection and preparedness.
How do you do that? Because you've identified the problem and what needs to be done, but what specifically in these developing countries should be happening, and how can you help?
Well, the first priority is suppression. So many of the measures that you now see being put in place, and whether we call them lockdowns or shutdowns, really are dramatic, requests to make of societies. And very often, even things that perhaps we still consider in more industrialized or well-developed countries and economies, something that we can do. Wash your hands, try and maintain social distance. We face situations in many developing countries where in slums, people don't have that option in the first place. They don't have access to health systems. So a lot of what is being done right now is, first of all, to help governments prepare their health systems for this, prepare also in terms of obtaining supplies and equipment and protective equipment, because much of that is not available right now, whether globally or in these countries in particular. The second major step is then to help countries identify the most vulnerable. We are dealing with urban slums, but we're also dealing with people, for example, who are refugees already, internally displaced. We are dealing with vulnerable communities such as indigenous peoples, or we are also looking at people with disability, how to identify those who need help first. Secondly, help also the country in terms of its economic and social impact measures to try and help people who do not have access to the social protection programs. We often forget that.
Can I add to that list of vulnerable people and add those who are suffering in conflict zones, thinking about Syria and Yemen right now? How can they be helped when coronavirus hits those countries?
Well, it's a dramatic situation. It's a crisis upon a crisis. And whether you look to Syria, you look to Yemen, you look to Libya right now, even in a country such as Congo, the Republic of Congo, where virtually nothing is produced right now. If the borders close, not only do you not have access to medical supplies, even food security becomes a major issue. The United Nations family, whether through peacekeeping, humanitarian, or also our colleagues in UNDP, we are currently present on the ground in Syria, in Libya, in Yemen, in these countries, trying to help as best as we can. But without the resources that the international community must make available to this, it's impossible. It's already a nightmare in many respects. And we will even have to face situations where governments essentially implode in their capacity to maintain a health system, or even for governments to function. So this is the front line. And this is why looking at the response strategies that are being put in place right now, we do need to recognize there is a very human face. This is a health crisis, but it's actually a human crisis. And this is why so much of what happens in the next few days and weeks will either help us as a global community to address this virus, or it will simply keep going and come back to us. This is why also Antonio Guterres today with the G20 leaders spoke to the enlightened self-interest. This is not only solidarity or charity, it is also enlightened self-interest. And the measures that we can take right now really can make a difference. Under the leadership of the WHO, the World Health Organization, dealing with the virus and the suppression, then dealing with the vulnerable groups and countries in the world, and ultimately, hopefully, be able to recover quickly, because otherwise this is a crisis of economic, social and political proportions that we have simply not faced for generations.
Yeah, you paint a pretty devastating picture, and you have a monumental task ahead of you. Arkham, thank you very much for joining us from New York, the head of the UN Development Programme there. Thanks for joining us here on BBC World News. Don't forget the website. We've got all the latest developments and a live page running there for you as well. Thanks for being with us.